to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Our friend Neo is celebrating his girlfriend's birthday. Happy birthday, Jackie. So he won't be here this week. And I'm not sure if Debbie's going to be here. Debbie G, if she's not going to be here this week, she will definitely be here next week, because next week is when we're going to talk about the surgery she went through and the various side events that came along with that. It was pretty significant stuff, but she's come on through on the other side real well. So we're really happy about that. But I do have a guest joining me today, and his name is Kody Duncan. And Kody is a member of something we've talked about quite a bit over the last, I don't know how many episodes. He's part of the positive psychology movement that kind of emerged starting circa late 1990s and kind of spread like wildfire around the major universities that delve into the psychological realm. I think over like the first 10 years of its existence, some of the most popular classes at the Ivy Leagues are positive psychology classes by large amounts, which doesn't surprise me a whole lot because, so let's be honest, most psychology is about abnormal psychology or really negative stuff. And to have a psychology class that actually, if I had a class like that available to me when I was in school, I would have taken it. I mean, seriously. Okay, listeners. Show of hands. How many people would not have taken that class? See, I told you. So, Kody, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, I have to admit, most of my knowledge about positive psychology comes from Sean Aker, although I have delved into some of the other teachers of positive psychology. But I'm going to be curious to know more about what it is that you've picked up in your travels. And give us a little background. Like, how did you get into this? Were you like what I was just describing? You were in school and you saw positive psychology. You said, "Ooh, that sounds good."
Yeah, it actually goes back a little further than that, but I did have a very similar experience to what you're explaining of being in college and like, gosh, everything here is really negative. And then there was the one class that was positive psychology, and I was like, man, what if this was my whole major? I think at that point, I actually looked up online, is there anywhere you can actually major in positive psychology? And I think it was literally in the last weeks of my last semester of college, I had found that there was, I think somewhere in Europe, that you can actually major in positive psychology. But I was like, oh, I'm done at this point. I wish I would have done this years ago. Yeah. But actually, yeah, for me, it started much earlier. When I was a teenager, I watched my parents go through a pretty dramatic transformation of their lives. I always saw them as great parents. Oh gosh, there's so much to this story. I could talk for an hour just about this story, but to kind of summarize, they both.
That's okay. We love stories, so don't worry about telling long stories. It's
good.
Okay.
Okay. Good. Well, so both my parents were severely overweight, depressed, not really in a good place in their marriage, struggling on a lot of fronts, and at some point they discovered kind of personal development, and friends would invite them over to some class that was being held at somebody's house, and they were going to talk about feel good stuff. And my dad was really resistant to it because he thought all these happy people were just a bunch of fakers, and that nobody was actually that happy in life. Which there's probably some truth to some of those.
Not too far off. Yeah.
But it was pretty earth shattering, like life altering to him the day that it finally somehow did hit him to the core. Like, wow, I can actually change. Like, I can be better. I can choose to think differently than the way I think now. And those decisions could actually result in me living a better life than I have now.
It actually makes a difference. That's the thought.
Yeah, that it actually makes a difference. Yeah. And so when that hit him, it kind of changed everything. I mean, he had gotten as low as to a point of almost taking his own life.
Wow.
And actually ended up building over the course of now almost 18 years, he's built a multi-million-dollar coaching business where he helps clients literally around the world. And so watching that transformation happen as a teenager, both my parents go from where they were, but they both lost over 100 pounds each. They both completely, I mean, the people they were, like I said, I always considered them to be amazing parents, but the people they were in my youngest years to my mid to upper teenage years and young adulthood is literally just night and day different watching the kind of lives that they were able to lead, and the literally thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that they influenced for good. And so anyways, that inspired me as a kid. Like it kind of burned into the deepest core of who I am. Like, wow, I can be good too. And if I think good thoughts, and I, if I engage in all these types of behaviors that really successful people do, then I'm more likely to experience some of the success and some of the happiness and well-being that they are. And that's essentially kind of the core idea of positive psychology. So in high school, I was super interested in psychology and took every class that there was, Psych 1, Psych 2, AP Psych, Sports Psych. I took everything.
Took all of them.
Yeah,
I'll take that package over here. Thank you.
Yeah, all of it. Pass it over here.
Sign me up.
I took all of it. Had an amazing teacher. We called her Kody. She was awesome. Absolute inspiration to me as well. Kind of developed a lot of my ideas in this area. And then, I just decided, you know what? I don't want to be a psychologist, but I want to help people. And maybe one day I'll work with my parents. And so maybe I should study psychology, because I don't know what else there is in college that would be related to this, So I go to college and I'm, majoring in psychology. And unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, there's definitely a place and need for abnormal psychology. There are those when they are really suffering, with mental illness or all kinds of other disorders and things like that. And we do need doctors who can help those people. My beef was the fact of like, why is so much focus being placed on this?
Yes.
There are countless things that can be done and taught preemptively to keep people from ever getting to that point. If we were primarily teaching people all these positive psychology, simple lifestyle changes and techniques you can do to be happy and to manage stress and be more resilient and build good habits and this kind of stuff, people are far less probable, just like statistically speaking, to end up experiencing those kind of mental illnesses and disorders. And in one time, I actually kind of stood up in class and grilled the teacher on it for a while and kind of made a scene. I was like, what is the deal with this? Like, why can't we talk more about this? And so that kind of became a little bit of my mission of like, gosh, I want to help get this out there, because it's, you can, when you start to be the one that's studying it all, after a while, you kind of assume everybody knows this too. And then you get out there talking to people, and so many people don't understand. They don't know these simple little things that many of them now, because of a lot of recent research in the last couple decades, are backed by science to actually make a difference in your life. So that's kind of some of the origins. And then I guess I'll finish with what I think is kind of some of the sweetest inspiration that led me to, even being on this conversation with you and starting my own, weekly newsletter about sharing habit examples, was when my wife was pregnant with our first child. She was, I think, 5 or 6 months pregnant. We knew it was going to be a daughter, and I don't have many memories. I have one older brother and one younger brother, so I don't have a lot of memories as a child being around other small children or babies. And I was super freaked out about being a dad and like excited, but I was also freaked out. Like, basically I felt the weight of the responsibility, of like, how can I be the best dad that I possibly can be? So I was doing listening to all kinds of podcasts and reading books and watching videos and trying to get any knowledge or wisdom that I could gather, to help prepare me to be a good dad. And one day I was out going on a jog, as I liked to do often, and I still like to do. I was out on a jog, and I was just thinking about all the things that I'd been learning, and thinking about my daughter and future daughter. She had not been born yet, and I thought about suddenly everything that I hoped she would be one day. I thought, man, when she grows up, I want her to be really charitable. I want her to help people. I want her to be a leader. I want her to be physically fit. I want her to be a lifelong learner. I just started thinking about all these things of the kind of person that I hope that she becomes. She's not even born yet. I'm already thinking of these things. And after like a few minutes of thinking about all the different aspects of who I want her to be, all of a sudden it was like God suddenly like pointed the finger at me and was like, you have to go first. And I felt that, just that, again, that responsibility. But at that time it didn't feel scary. It just felt like this, almost like this honor and privilege of like, wow, if I hope that my daughter or any of my future children ever become these cool hopes and dreams that I have for them, how can I expect that if I'm not going first? If I'm not leading, by example and doing
Which
my
is
best
exactly
to
what your parents did. I mean, you had
exactly.
great models. Not many
Exactly.
people can claim to have that kind of great modeling from their parents. You got perfect modeling.
Yeah. So that just kind of hit me personally at that point. I was like, wow, okay, I need to study this. I need to learn about it. How, and I saw the connection of how all of this really was a basis of
Mm.
habits. What habits was I building in my life at the time? And I saw a lot of weaknesses in where I wanted my kids to be and where I was, which was
Mhm.
meant that I needed to be, I needed to develop in those areas. And essentially, the rest is history. I've been studying, like I said, I majored in psychology, and even in all the abnormal psychology classes, I was always looking for the positive side, the silver lining around it of like, how could this be framed in a way of what people could do to live a good life before they encounter these kind of struggles? And always was looking at with that kind of perspective, literally thinking, even in my college classes, because one day I want to teach people this. I want to help people know what they could do to live a good and happy life in really reasonable, manageable ways that don't feel so big and huge and intimidating. Like I'm changing everything about my life, but it can just be little bite-sized, choices and decisions that we can make that really make that difference.
Well, especially that last bit that you talked about. That's a great form of modeling all by itself. You just said it. I'm constantly looking for ways to something around. This is my wording rather than your wording.
Sure.
What's the more positive way I can look at this thing? That's a great process all by itself. Simply because so many of us, I would say overwhelmingly, the majority of us, do exactly the opposite. We do what my friend Joel Elson calls awfulizing. We take something that's not so good and we make it worse.
Yeah, or something neutral and make it bad.
That's right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. In fact, when you were talking about standing up in class and making a nuisance of yourself by saying, "Where's the positive psychology stuff?" It gave me a flashback to when I was in school in the 1970s. So it's been this is back when we were building fire in caves, and the psychology was it was nowhere near positive psychology at that point. And I do remember, I don't think it was in a class. I think I just went to one of the professors who was teaching abnormal psychology, and I said, "Where do I find the normal psychology class?" And he
That's
says, "Well,
awesome.
you check out the intro class." And I said, "I did. It's all about abnormal psychology."
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I love that. Where do I find the normal psychology? That's so true.
I wasn't even aiming for positive. I was just like, something more.
Can I find normal? Can I just get normal? Like, where's ground zero?
At this point, years later, I'm almost surprised the professor didn't say, "Well, what do you think abnormal is?" Abnormal is normal.
Hey, bro.
It's the new norm.
No kidding. Yeah. Seriously though.
Oh
That's
my
funny.
goodness. Yeah. Oh boy. My ex-wife actually was also a therapist, and she
Mhm.
often has said that um when she was a therapist, it was just before positive psychology came in, and she wished, well, I guess it was just coming in toward the end of her career as a therapist, and she wished that she'd known about it. Not that necessarily she would have stayed with the career any longer, but just because she felt like it would have made her a more effective therapist.
Mm. Yeah.
Because with the normal therapy approach, not that there's anything wrong with therapy does great things, but the normal therapy approach is basically a talk approach. It's like,
Yeah.
talk your problems out, but it doesn't do a whole lot in terms of helping what to replace it with. The stuff that
Mm.
you're
Yeah.
talking it out to get it out, but what do you put in?
Yeah.
It doesn't really go that far. That's not what therapy is designed to do, it's kind of a shame, really, because
Yeah.
that's the perfect opportunity. You've just cleaned out the system. When are you going to install the new operating system?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and anytime you eliminate something, you've now made space. And
Right.
unless you intentionally choose how you're going to fill that space, whatever the default is highly likely to come back, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and that works even on a level of just talking about habits. It, that's why, when I talk about habits, I primarily focus on building good habits. Occasionally, I'll venture into eliminating a bad habit, but very rarely. And I think I've only really talked about it in reference to like kicking the habit of like social media addiction or like overuse. But mostly, my philosophy around that is because if we only talk about eliminating the bad habit, and you're not choosing what you're going to do next, that bad habit will just come right back. Just
Yeah.
trying to eliminate a habit, well, that just all that does is maybe get you to zero for a little while, and then again your defaults will take over unless you choose something different.
Yeah, there's an old saying, nature abhors a vacuum, and that's an example of it. If you don't fill that space with something else will come in. And that other thing, like you said, is very likely to be the thing that you tried to leave behind because that's the easiest approach. That's the one
Exactly.
that has the least amount of resistance. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been there for the first time in the first place.
Exactly. So yeah, I agree with you. In the traditional like therapy model, that unfortunately, I do think if it was just combined with some, along with those principles of positive psychology, it would feel like more of a whole experience. Manage
Mm,
what's here, and then okay, now what's next. And that may be why there's such a massive market right now in like life coaching, is because it feels like that's answering that question. And I
yeah.
can't tell you how many people I've spoken to who literally talk about taking that journey where they were with a therapist and they say, well, now that I have a life coach,
Yeah.
I'm no longer going to my therapist. It's literally like they're bridging that gap to the next steps, because that's where the
True.
life coach's focus is everything of what you should do next,
And so
how to
many
improve
of
your
the
life
people who've
from
been
there.
on the show have been life coaches, so I know exactly what you're talking about
Yeah.
because not only is that a good way, I'm sure, of describing their experience, but it also describes their personal experience. I mean, anybody who gets into any of this kind of coaching stuff, not anybody, 90% or more, let's put it that way, do so because they had some kind of a crash and burn, some major thing that was going on that they had to work through, and then they found the golden answer that worked for them, and they said, "Wow,
Yeah.
I got to share this with everybody else," and then they became a coach. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many
Exactly.
times that story plays out. It plays out
Yeah.
over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's cool. That's basically people saying, I want to give back, after I got this great thing. That's
Yeah.
a wonderful feeling. Yeah,
Yeah. It kind of feels like it completes the circle when you.
it does.
I mean, it's what I'm doing too. I'm still very much in the middle of still working on my own habits. I don't profess to be an expert or the king of habits. I'm still consistently working on my own habits. Right now, I'm trying to tackle waking up at 5 a.m. every morning, because I've never been like a great morning person, like consistently waking up super early and being productive first thing in the morning. And it wasn't until recently, over the last month, it was like at least 2 weeks in a row, every day waking up at 5. I think I had, on Sundays, I slept in. But other than that, 2 weeks in a row, I woke up at 5 a.m. every day. And for me, that was a big deal. For other people, it's like, oh, I've been doing that for 20 years. For me, that was a big deal. So, anyways, but as I'm through this journey, it's the same experience. Every time I find something new that's really helping me in my habits, it it feels like I'm completing the circle to turn around and say, hey, well, maybe this will work for you too. This made a difference for me. I'd love to see if it could make a difference for you as well.
For me, earlier in my career, it was more about not wanting to wake up at 5 o'clock. Like, please, can I sleep in? I just want to be sleeping in for a while.
Right?
I've had enough of this waking up early stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
So it just
Totally.
goes to prove that there's no right answers. There's nothing that's the right path for everybody. The real question is,
Exactly.
what is it that you
Yeah.
want?
Exactly. I actually have a really funny story about that. One of my newsletters I wrote a couple months ago, that people were telling me like, wow, this was awesome. Like, I've never considered these ideas before. It was just as much of a kind of aha moment for me when I was writing
Mhm.
it. I'd read a few years ago a book. Oh my gosh, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I think it was Admiral McClaven. I want to say is his name,
Mhm.
Admiral something McClaven. He wrote a book called Make Your Bed. He's like an ex-Navy SEAL, and pretty short book. But the entire book is going into the details of his Navy SEAL experience and how above anything else, he makes the case that making your bed is essentially the best thing you could possibly do to improve your life every day, starting your day by making the bed. And it's not just one reason. He has all these different arguments for why that's the case. For one example, he says, if you have, as a Navy SEAL, you have really, really crappy days, and to come back to your bed at the end of the night, and you have this nicely made bed to remind you, no matter what else happened, I did one thing right today. And I guess they're like absolutely insane and meticulous about an exact way of making your bed.
Oh yeah, the military bed making.
Yeah. And if you do it wrong, there's I can't remember all the stuff, but there's consequences for doing it wrong, and even the tiniest little things, and so anyways, he has all these arguments for why making your bed is objectively the best thing you could possibly do to improve your life. And that was such an interesting idea at the time. Well, then a few months ago, if you're familiar with the show Shark Tank, where these big, millionaires and billionaire investors are looking at, startup companies and deciding whether or not to invest in them. Well, I was kind of going on this Shark Tank binge for a couple weeks, watched them on YouTube. And one of them, these two older women come in and they pitch this idea. It was some kind of sheet that made it really easy for making the bed. I can't remember exactly what was the proprietary thing about it, but there was some unique design to the sheet that made it really simple and fast for making your bed. And I was shocked when Mark Cuban, who's by far, by 10 magnitudes, I think, more wealthy than any other shark on the show of the investors.
Yeah,
he's I think into the 4 or 6 billion, maybe even 8 billion at this point that he's worth.
Yeah.
He tells the person, he says, hey, look, you guys, I love what you're doing. You've got some great energy and everything, but I can't invest in this because years ago I swore I would never make my bed again for the rest of my life. And I was like, what? And I had to go back and rewatch, what did he just say? This billionaire said what? And he explains, no, I swore that I would never make my bed again in my life because early on in my career, I did the math of how much time it would take for me to make my bed, on a weekly and then yearly and then every decade. And then after 30, 40, 50 years, how much time that would be. And I just have better things to do. I have more important stuff to be working on than making my bed that I'm just going to come up and mess up again at the end of the night. I just need more time to go produce. I don't need to spend time making the bed, And I was just shocked, wow, this idea that my whole life I thought, and then had been solidly confirmed by this Admiral McClaven of yes, making the bed is objectively good. And then all of a sudden, this billionaire, super successful man says, oh no, I never make my bed. And I swear I never will. And here's my reasons why. It just put me kind of, gave me some humble pie of wow, even when it seems like there's all these good reasons for doing something, maybe even studies to back it up, that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be exactly the same for every single person. And like you said, which kind of started me on this, is you said, it depends on what you're looking for.
Right.
So, Admiral McClaven, we was talking about, one of the other things that he said, he just talked multiple ways about kind of the mental, emotional, psychological benefits, the confidence it would give you in the morning, the accomplishment that you would feel at the end of the day to come back and see that it's made no matter what happened in the day. So these feelings of emotional and mental comfort and confidence and accomplishment, right? Well, then you look at this billionaire. He didn't need that. He was already so accomplished, so driven, and so confident. It's the little benefit of making the bed that would do for him was unnecessary. He gets enough confidence and accomplishment and whatever in just what he does every day. And so he was just looking for something different. It wasn't necessary for him. And so both of them can be totally right. And, and that's okay. And so anyways, I shared in this newsletter, what are you looking for? What do you need? And go with that. And of course, after I sent out this newsletter, my wife reads it and she's like, did you write a whole article just to get an excuse to never make the bed again? So we've had to work out a deal with my wife where we decided whoever's the last one in bed in the morning gets to make the bed.
So now we know why you want to be up at 5 o'clock.
May or may not be why I started waking up at 5 a.m.
That is funny. Yeah, actually, you're reminding me of a truth that I learned probably, I'm going to say 20, 25 years ago, which is that there's no such thing as an objective truth. All truths are subjective. And it took me a while to get there. But once I finally got there, it was very freeing to realize that, because it also makes it easier for me to do a podcast, because I get lots of really interesting perspectives. People coming on, they've got this great technique, this great process, this great method, whatever. And they're great, but they don't work for everybody. Why? Because value is subjective.
Yeah.
What works is subjective. It comes down to the individual, and every individual is going to be different, and every individual's choice is going to be appropriate for that individual.
Yeah.
When we can come to terms with the fact that there's no such thing as an objective truth, an objective solution, life gets so much easier. It just gets so much easier.
It's interesting. I mean, from a religious perspective, like I'm a Christian boy, I would say my argument would be, well, I would think that there are some universal truths that I believe to be like capital T truths. But then in conversations like this, where there's, strategies and techniques to things like that, 100% would agree that you're standing on pretty shaky ground if you're trying to say that you are 100% the best way to do something. And again, even if there's a whole lot of science to back it up, that may be true for the majority. And generally that's a good, good recommendation. If you've got a lot of research that says the average person, this is most effective for them, which is a lot of what I share. I try and find studies that are backed up by a lot of different perspectives of, on average, this is going to help most people. But then I may still get somebody, respond to my newsletter and say, hey, for example, is actually a great example. One of my favorite books is called The How of Happiness by Sonia Lyubomirsky. Highly recommend. And one of the things that was so shocking to me reading it was she talks about gratitude journaling, which everyone's like, oh, I've heard of gratitude journaling. And while that may be true, most people assume, because they've either assumed or they've either been told for years or kind of just received this message from different people that, well, if you gratitude journal, it's objectively better to do it every day, because if something's good, you should just do more of it and you should be doing it every day, right? Well, Sonia Lyubomirsky, I mean, in the whole book, she set out to essentially scientifically test all of the personal development and life coaching strategies that have been promulgated and be like, okay, but does this work really? And if it does work, under what circumstances and why and how does it work? And that's what I love so much about this book is how much science she brings to the table in this kind of personal development conversation that for many years didn't have a lot of science to it. So anyways, with gratitude journaling, she drops the bomb of saying, well, yes, gratitude journaling is good and it has all these different benefits, but the biggest benefits, and in some cases, the only benefits, were for those that gratitude journaled, if I remember correctly, it was 3 times a week. Or no, sorry. They had 3 times a week or once a week. And it was those who did it once a week had more benefit to their well-being and happiness than those that were journaling 3 times a week.
Interesting.
Blew my mind.
Those are norms, of course.
Sure.
Those are averages.
Sure,
so
exactly.
Even that we have to take with a grain of salt, but still, that's an interesting result.
Exactly. Well, and what was interesting was that the other group, in fact, that was doing it 3 times a week, about halfway through the study, had a decrease in happiness before coming back to base level by the end of it. And their argument was like, well, what happened here was people began to feel it was almost like a chore that they were doing it every day, as opposed to this unique kind of experience to get to reflect on the things they were grateful for. It became, oh, I've still got to go do that thing, and that's how she explains it. She has actually multiple different studies where they found similar trends, but in other types of techniques where, for example, another one was like doing acts of service. They did a same kind of thing where somebody was doing it every day, like a small act of service every day, or multiple large acts of service in one day, once a week or something. Same thing happened. Those that were doing it, all kind of collected together in one day had way bigger increases in their well-being that continued several months afterwards. Like those increases in well-being stayed for several months afterwards, as opposed to those who were doing it every day, again, feeling like it was a chore. And so I share some of these things in my newsletter, And then I get a couple replies from people, some that are like, oh, this is awesome, I'm gonna try it. And then others who say, oh, well, I've been gratitude journaling every day for 10 years and I love it. It's like, well, great. If that works for you, don't stop. If that's working for you, awesome. You happen to not fall into the average. For you don't see it as a chore. It's genuinely a joy. And so you don't fit into the average, which is great. You're above average.
Well, more than
Congratulations.
that, not only do they not fit into the average, what they do fit into is what their joy is.
Exactly.
That's the driving factor right there.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy it? It's going to work. Do you not enjoy it? Don't bother. You're wasting your time.
Exactly. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, that I talk to people about when they're considering starting a certain habit is too often people these days are starting habits because either a certain habit is trendy or because they actually feel an obligation to.
Yeah.
Like they feel an expectation on them
I've
because
done
either
that.
a lot of people have told them or again, there's this kind of social consensus that this thing is objectively better. And so I should do that. But if you actually ask them, they'd say, I don't really want to. It doesn't bring me happiness to do this. Well, then why are you doing that? If you're going into building a habit and you don't actually enjoy this and you don't want to, how could you expect to have a good experience and for that habit to stick? And of course, there's ways you can make a habit more interesting and fun. If it's something you don't like, but you want to like, sometimes that's the case where maybe people don't like exercise, but they want to like it. And so there's things you can do to make it more fun. Like my wife, she does Zumba, dance exercising because she doesn't like going to the gym. So she found a way to make exercise fun and she loves that version of it,
Which is good. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So
I love that. And you also, you've used a word a few times that I always kind of latch onto it in reverse, if you know what I mean. By in reverse, I mean that I use it as a warning flag. Whenever I find myself using that word, I say, oh, yeah, maybe it's time to rethink. And the word is should. The moment that I say I should do something, should. Yeah, I'm shoulding again. No, don't should all over the place.
my dad used to always say, don't should on yourself.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I try and be careful with that myself. I'm not sure all the ways that I've used it in this conversation, but that is something actually recently I was talking to somebody about the same exact thing. One of my friends, we were having the conversation about things with, my relationship with my wife, his relationship with his wife, and our expectations on our wives or their expectations on us of, for example, my wife, in the conversation, I was saying, yeah, I wish my wife was a little bit better listener because, as you can tell, I like telling long stories and I like sharing a lot of details. And she's a very get to the point kind of person. And so I was saying things like, well, I just wish she would be like this, and kind of, I don't remember if I said the word exactly, but I was definitely giving the feeling of she should be this way. And then it was great because I've asked the same question to other people, but he was a good friend at the time and turned it back on me and he said, well, how do you know you're not the one that needs to change? Maybe you.
Great question.
Yeah. And he says, well, how do you know you don't need to be better at being more concise? And I was like, oh, you're right, Stephen. She is who she is. I married her and I love her. And, whether or not she ever, changes in her ability to listen for long periods of time attentively, I know I can get better at being concise, and so why wouldn't I focus on that instead of dumping the blame and the should on her,
Yeah, I love that. That's absolutely true. In fact, it also reminds me that one of the hardest things to integrate, to accept sometimes, but certainly to integrate on a regular basis, is the idea that we are the common denominators of our own lives.
Yeah.
And because we all have this tendency to say it's the other person. I've been saying,
Yeah.
I'm literally now on the cusp of being finally divorced. We separated in early October. It was a shock to me. I told the story to listeners so they know the story, but bottom line is most of what happened really is her stuff. But to be truthful with myself, I had to say, you know what? I had a role in this too. This didn't just happen. I am the common denominator in my own life. It's a really uncomfortable thing to face.
Yeah, that's not fun.
No.
It's not fun.
No, but it's necessary.
Yes.
And I find that every time that I am willing to stop and ask myself, okay, yeah, she did have her stuff. Yeah, a lot of this was hers, but what was my role? And
Yeah.
actually identify what my role it was in whatever the thing was.
Yeah.
That's when I achieved the greatest steps forward.
Yeah.
And when you're going through something like that, you want to take those steps forward, because otherwise you're just staying in that place of, oh God, I feel so miserable because my marriage just ended.
Yeah. Exactly. That's a hard thing to do.
It is.
Not everyone is willing to even consider that idea. Unfortunately, and that means that they will likely continue to experience similar things, because whatever it was that is their role, they're choosing to be unconscious of, and will continue to play out over and over and over again. And I think that's really why a lot of people feel like they may be in a place in their life where they're on repeat. Every relationship ends the same, or every job they end up getting fired from. And it's always the job, and it's always the other person. It's always the other thing. And I love the way I've understood that concept. I've never heard it phrased the way you said it, with "you are the common denominator."
Yeah.
I love
it.
that.
It really summarizes it, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
it brings it
awesome.
home. Yeah. So something else also, and this directly comes from the positive psychology movement. Like I said, Sean Akers, the one that I've paid the most attention to. I absolutely fell in love with his book, The Happiness Advantage, when it came out. And I've enjoyed his TED Talk and his various videos and so forth. When he came out with the book, the first book, he's done 2 or 3 books now, but when he came out with that first book, of course, he did a book tour, because that's what you do when you're an author. You do a book tour. And he ended up on PBS. He ended up doing a special on PBS to promote the book, and basically went through, obviously in a TV program, you can't do the whole book. So he was touching on the highlights of the book. And then at the end of the presentation, he did, like, I'll call it an appendix. Yeah, but the book was done. He was done with the presentation, and he did this last bit with the audience. And I've never seen him publish this anywhere. I've never seen him talk about it anywhere. I wish he would. I personally believe it is the greatest breakthrough that positive psychology has achieved, and like nobody seems to know about it, and it's driving me nuts. So I talk about it a lot here on the show. But he did a study. Of course, he went to Harvard, and he was also a grad student at Harvard. He was part of the group that formed the first positive psychology department at Harvard. And while he was there, one of his concerns was, I mean, he was an RA. He was a grad student who was teaching. A teaching assistant, in the positive psychology program, and he was constantly concerned with how much pressure Harvard students put on themselves, which is not surprising. I mean, they're supposed to be the best of the best, and that's why they're there, and they're creating these great lives and careers for themselves, and so the pressure undoubtedly is going to be enormous. But he wanted to help them find ways to alleviate that pressure, so he decided to do a survey where he was basically going to probe all the different areas of their lives to find out what, and not just their lives, but also faculty and then, everybody who's involved in the Harvard community. I think 1/5 of the population took this study.
Wow.
And he was going to find out what's the best way of predicting whether or not someone's going to succeed with whatever it is they want to do in life, so that he could tell the students about it and they could find a way to relax. Like, okay, all I have to do is just keep doing more of this.
Yeah.
And he came up with, I don't know how long the survey was. He hinted in this little presentation after he talked about the book, he hinted that it was like over 100 questions. He didn't actually say that, but I'm guessing it was over 100 questions that he came up with. And he was questioning, like, what kind of family do you come from? How often do you study? What major? Where do you study? Do you study with friends? Like on and on and on, all these different questions. He couldn't find any correlations except for the last question that he threw on as an afterthought just before he put the survey out.
Oh my goodness.
And the question was about social connections. And it turned out that the correlation between social connectedness and the ability to predict on that factor alone whether or not someone's going to succeed with whatever it is they're trying to succeed with was 0.7. In other words, 70% predictive all by itself.
Wow.
And I thought, oh my God, one factor? How often do we get one factor that has that much influence?
That's incredible.
And he also gave us a way to compare it. He said the correlation between smoking cigarettes and getting cancer is 0.44.
Oh my gosh.
That you can understand why I am just mind blown. How could this not be published anywhere? I have never seen this published anywhere. I got to write Sean one of these days. I got to say, why haven't you published that thing?
No kidding.
It's like mind blowing.
That is crazy. I can't believe, yeah, I'm with you. I'm speechless. I can't believe that wouldn't be published. I mean, a whole book should be written just on
It
that.
should be, right? Yeah.
That's incredible.
And
Wow.
I've actually developed my own theory. Now I have no testing, no study at all to back this up. But my theory is there are two factors that if you put them together are probably close to 99% predictive. The
Hmm.
first one, social connections. The second one, self-confidence and self-love.
I was just gonna say, I bet it. Yep. Yeah.
I'll bet you it,
Interesting.
I mean, I'd love to see a survey that, a study that puts those two factors together and
Hmm.
tries to find out how predictive they are. I bet you
No
it's going to be
kidding.
almost perfect. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no such thing as perfect, but I bet you it's going to be pretty darn close.
Huh. Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That I mean, that aligns with Sonia Lyubomirsky from the How of Happiness I was talking about earlier.
Mm,
She talks a lot about how the same thing, and she has her own studies. So you could look up, you could read her book and look up her stuff. But she has her own studies, also heavily linking um, basically social connections as the number one predictor of happiness above all the
right.
other things. Um, and so, and you can see this play out, around
Sure.
the world when you look at. So I lived in Honduras for 2 years for a church
Mm,
mission, and you could see people living in a dirt and stick kind of hut and smiling and being happy. And it's like,
mm.
how,
How is that
you
possible?
yeah, you would look at your construct of everything you've been told about what makes somebody happy, and this person has none of it.
Hmm.
Why are they happy?
Yeah.
Because of their family and their friends that they have. Like, that supersedes literally every other circumstance. And I'm sure there's other arguments you could make, but the most common factor here in everything is social connections, and so it makes sense as a predictor of not just happiness, but also success in life. I mean, you hear this in many different industries that it's not it's not what you know, but who you know.
Yeah.
Like that's a common thing as well. So
Mhm.
not only is it a predictor of happiness, it apparently is correlated with just overall success. If are good at making connections with people, then you'll go further. Which as an introvert, I'm like, dang it, but
Yeah, me too. I'm a natural introvert as well. I know exactly
yeah,
what you mean. Yeah,
yeah. But I guess it's worth noting that introverts don't necessarily not have connections. We just connect in different ways.
that's true.
Deeper with fewer people, as opposed to I hate to say more shallow, but not as deep with more people. For extroverts.
I think we
Um,
also have an advantage too. The advantage is because of that tendency to be deep in our connections, the more connections we can add, it's very likely we're going to make them deep connections. So we're
that's
actually going to
true.
make much more powerful connections each time that we make one. So I've actually been actively reaching out, well, partly from doing this show. In fact, that got me through when my wife left
Mm,
because I was devastated after
yeah.
that, just totally devastated. But it was my contacts, my
Mhm.
co-hosts, and the people I'm closest to who have done a lot of episodes with me here on the show. They're really great friends, and a lot of this is also great. A lot of them are therapists and life coaches, and boy, that makes it a whole lot
Yeah.
easier.
Oh yeah,
So
for
I
sure.
reached out to them and I said, "Hell, I'm in this terrible situation. You got to help me through it," and they came through,
Wow.
and in a big, big way. I
Mm,
mean, I've learned a lot doing this show. I've learned a lot of processes, a lot of methods and so forth, and I was applying a lot of them.
mm.
But without that support from my virtual friends, and that's what they are.
Yeah.
There's one of them that I've met physically. The others I've never met physically, but my virtual friends were right there, and boy, did that make a difference. I was so glad to have those social connections, and it
Mm,
really reinforced for me. I want more. I
yeah.
want more social connections.
Mm,
I mean, even that, I don't think it's ever enough. I think you really need to have as many as you can put together.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, and you know what I love about that? That's beautiful is we talk so much about how all the negatives to social media these days.
Mm,
There's a big focus on it, and there are
there are
a
plenty,
lot
sure.
of downsides to social media. But what a blessing! What a beautiful thing that
Yeah,
technology connected you with people
right.
that were
Yeah,
able to support you when you needed it, and that
that's
still delivered that emotional and moral support you needed, even though it was virtual, and even though you never. I have friends too that I've literally never met in person, or I've been maybe a total of 20 minutes with them in person, but I've spent probably hundreds of hours talking to them online in different ways. And so it is really cool. And there are some beautiful things there. As you were talking, I also remembered another set of studies I've heard a different application of social connections, and their benefits, that actually people who've had serious injuries or illnesses, or been hospitalized, that those who had more social connections, it was directly correlated with their recovery time being significantly shorter. That they recovered much faster
Makes
when they
sense.
had more social connections. Those that felt more alone literally took longer for their bodies to heal and recover. So,
I
I
believe
mean,
it. Yeah.
I'm sure we could go on and on about every single aspect of your life. That there's got to be a study for it, or something somewhere, that social connections are powerful.
Well, I'm going to contact Sean. I put it off long enough.
Do
Sean, you
it.
don't know me. I've talked about you a lot on my podcast, but
Yeah.
you really need to publish that study.
No kidding. And then tell me what he says, because I'll
Right,
know.
right.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Of course, I'll find out that. Well, I did publish it. It's in my third book, page 465.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
sorry, I didn't know that.
You mean I had to read 400 pages to find it?
To which I'll probably reply, "What? That's the only place you're going to put it out? Really?
Right? Yeah.
You should be screaming this one from the rafters, for goodness sake."
No
This
kidding.
is just, well, of course, that's shitting again, but still.
Yeah. You could be shouting this from the rafters.
That's right. Well, that's the other tricky part. I mean, if we change the language, have we really changed the thought?
Yeah, right. That's funny.
Yeah. Maybe it's more along the lines of, I'd appreciate it if you would.
Yes, there you go. That see, I love that. That's a good way to
Yeah.
rephrase it. I'd appreciate it. Or, here's an idea, or something like that.
Mhm.
No obligation.
No obligation, right? But if you don't, I'm going to stop paying attention to you. No.
Right. No obligation, with a caveat.
That's right. No carrots. I mean, no sticks, rather, just carrots.
Yeah.
We avoid sticks.
That's awesome.
That the combination of social connections and self-love and self-confidence. We haven't talked about that a whole lot, but let's bring that in, and I'll bring it in through my own experience, because in my younger years, in my 20s particularly, I really had very little self-confidence. If you had asked me then, I've said this often, if you had asked me then, I would have said, oh yeah, I have self-confidence. And I think to a certain degree, I would have believed that was true. But looking back, I think the answer would be more accurately, I had some self-confidence, but I didn't really have enough self-confidence for many, many things that I needed it for. And so today I feel very sensitized to the topic, and I really want to help anyone who is willing to look at their own level of self-confidence, self-love. I want to really encourage them to do that, and to take steps to improve it, because boy, I really know from experience just how important that is. So I'm just curious, what do you have any? I mean, I have things I've talked about, but do you have any approaches, methods, processes, whatever, that you do or advocate to build that?
To build it, well, I have one idea before I go into anything necessarily to build it. And I do have some ideas there, but one thing that just came up as you're talking about that was it threw me back to some of the few college classes I actually really loved. There was the positive psychology class, and then there was a social psychology class that I felt like was really close to positive psychology, the way my professor taught it. Dr. Diane Tice, she's a researcher, incredible woman, also married to another very prominent researcher in willpower. I mean, both of them, a lot of what I believe and teach honestly came from them. So I owe a lot of credit to them. But they were kind of a big foundation. And then along with my positive psychology class, one of the ideas that stuck out to me in the social psychology class, there was a study that that Dr. Tice shared in California, where they had assumed that they had the theory that, well, if our students had better self-esteem, they would get better scores in school. They'd get better grades. They thought we just need to improve their self-esteem, and it completely backfired. They built up people's self-esteem. They became the students became really confident and cocky, but they didn't actually get better grades. Now I'll connect that to an entirely different. I guess I wouldn't even say study, philosophy from some of the things that we were learning in positive psychology, was the idea that maybe instead of so much focus on, and I do think there's a difference between self-esteem and self-confidence. But even taking it a step further, because you followed it up with, you said self-confidence and self-love. So one of the ways that my positive psychology professor would phrase it is self-compassion, and that should be the biggest thing we should work to develop is self-compassion, and then compassion for others.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can focus on those two, because ultimately, like true self-confidence that doesn't lead to cockiness or overconfidence really is just self-compassion, to give ourselves mercy for our mistakes, but love ourselves for, the things that we do well, and it's okay that we're not perfect, but that we can embrace the areas that we are striving in, and but also be merciful to those mistakes. And I think all of that kind of wraps up really nicely in the package of just self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, so self-compassion, I think, is a really great perspective to have there, both for yourself and for others. Now, for building that, the self-compassion side, I like to play, actually, it would be more of the other compassion for others. A
Mm-hmm.
game that I like to play, because we get into a lot of like judging others and assuming the worst in others, So there's kind of a little game that I like to play with myself where when I feel that urge or temptation or whatever you want to call it to judge someone or like think really harshly of like, gosh, why would they do that? They're so dumb. Like it was such a terrible decision, or why would they do that to hurt this person or hurt myself, or just that was just a stupid decision, to play the game of what kind of life must they be living to think that is a good idea, like just and not in a sarcastic way, in a genuine way of pondering, like where might they be mentally or emotionally for that to be the best decision that they saw fit. Because sometimes we make decisions that to others wouldn't look like a good decision, but we know based on our circumstances that was the best we had.
Right.
And so essentially kind of play that game of, what might be going on in their day. Maybe they just cut me off because they've got a family member in the emergency room and they just got the call, and I'm sure you've heard ideas like this before, but really trying to play that out and coming up with 2 or 3 different reasons that would explain their behavior in a positive light, and that really help you to kind of reach out emotionally and connect with them and go, you know what, like I really don't know what's going on with them. I'm just going to assume the best, even if it's not true, because why not? Even if my explanation isn't actually true, maybe they were just being a jerk. Wouldn't that leave me better off at least? If I can at least think positively about them and move on instead of judging them. I think it's like a quote from Buddha or something like that, judging others is like holding onto a hot coal tightly in your fist, like never actually throwing it at the other person, but you're just holding it tightly. And essentially it's just burning yourself. So if you can at least pretend that there's a really good reason why somebody else did something, if nothing else, it lets you relax, move on, and have thought something. Exactly. Yeah. And exactly. Let go of the coal. And if you do that consistently, you might actually build a habit of assuming the best in people. And you know what? Most of the time, you're probably not going to be too far off in your guesses. Just the way life goes. If you, there's a quote by, and I'm going to butcher this paraphrasing, but there's a quote by Henry B. Eyring that if you assume that everyone you talk to is in an extremely difficult position, 9 out of 10 times, you're going to be right. That they're going through some extreme challenge in their life, that most people, they're not talking about it publicly. They're keeping some challenge private in their life, and you don't know what's going on. But if you assume that that's the case and talk to them and treat them as if they're going through something difficult, and treat them with respect and kindness and generosity and offering help, most of the time you'll be right, and you'll have created this beautiful social connection that really ultimately helps both of you. When you were
talking about the students, right? When you were talking about the students who they worked on self-esteem and their grades didn't improve. That
Yeah.
this kind of tied into the first thought that came into my mind, because the first thought in my mind was, well, did they want to be there? Did they really want to have better grades? Was that their goal? Because
Yeah.
when you describe them as being cocky, the first thought that came into my mind was, that doesn't sound like somebody who actually wants to get better at taking the test or at learning the thing. It sounds to me that
Yeah.
they just want, they want to please somebody so they can go off to do something else they really wanted to do instead.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good perspective on that. I've never heard that perspective on that study, but you're probably right, because essentially they're the researchers and the teachers and the school board that created this program. They inserted the goal of get better grades, but that
It was
doesn't
their goal. It
necessarily
wasn't the student's goal.
exactly, it was their goal, not the student's goal.
Yeah.
And it definitely setting goals for other people usually doesn't work very well.
As so often happens with this show, we're all of a sudden finding that the hour is nearly up, and I want to go on for another hour, but I'm sure
I
I
know.
can't, and I'm sure you can't. We have limitations that we live within our lives. We have other things we have going on, but I
This
would
has
love
been
to
so
keep
much
going.
fun, though.
It really is. It's a lot of fun. But before we let you go, there's a couple things we need. First of all, you mentioned that you have a newsletter. It's an email newsletter. How do
Yep.
people get that?
Yeah, so I send out an email newsletter with 5-minute habit tips every Tuesday. Basically, you can go to habitexamples.com and subscribe right there on the main page. Or if you'd like, I actually put together a gift for you. I come bearing gifts, or at least singular, a gift.
That's cool.
If you go to habitexamples.com/free, FREE, you'll receive a mini course that I put together. When you subscribe, you'll find it in the welcome email. This mini course basically is all about the 3 most common reasons that you struggle with habits and how to fix and solve each one of those, so that you can really succeed at building whatever great habits you want to build.
That's great. Yeah. Okay. So I'll make sure that I'll include a link to the main page of your site in the show notes. And then for someone who wants to learn a little bit more, maybe they want to talk to you about, I don't know, they want to get some more from you. How do they find you personally?
Honestly, subscribe to my newsletter and hit reply. I mean, I'm always open to hear from you. Literally, as soon as you get, the first email or one of my newsletters I send on Tuesdays, hit reply and talk to me. Ask me a question. I'd love to chat and, share more thoughts or answer your questions or anything. But my whole philosophy with my newsletter is that everything I share is really small, simple, digestible ideas that you can actually take action on that week or even that day. That they're not massive, intimidating changes you have to make in your life. They're very basic. I always try and, as you've heard, if you've listened this far, I always try and reference studies or other famous examples. So it's not just me, pulling ideas out of a hat.
Right.
But I try and make them very, very simple. And like I said, they're called 5-minute habit tips because you can usually read them in, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. So super simple. You can work it into your day. And honestly, that's the best way to stay connected with me and continue learning from me. And like I said, hit reply if you ever want to talk.
What a refreshing alternative to social media. It's like, you can find me on Instagram, you can find me on Facebook, on LinkedIn. Like, no, just subscribe to my email. I respond to emails. Oh, well, hey, that's old school.
Yeah, it is kind of different, and it's a little bit. I mean, yes, I do have an Instagram. If you wanted to follow me at the Habit Examples handle on Instagram, you can follow me there. But definitely my number one focus is the newsletter, and kind of on purpose. I easily could have built this on a social media platform, but I love as much as I can staying off social media. So I love having a way that I can reach you right in your inbox that doesn't require you to go on a platform where you might end up, down a rabbit hole or comparing yourself to other people. And this can really just be a direct, connection with you and I. And so I was kind of intentional about that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's really good. One other thing I need to share with you before we sign off today, and this is something I share with all my guests, because like you, all my guests are givers. Your natural impulse is to be a giver, and you in particular, because you have this free newsletter that you're giving away, and your desire is just to help people. My thing goes like this. There are many people who we never meet, we never see, who consume our content.
Mm.
For me, it's this podcast. For you, it's your newsletter. It could be blog posts. It could be stuff you put on social media. It could be whatever. And you help people, and you don't even know that you help them.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do. Sometimes you get the email or the instant message or whatever. But most of the time, we don't hear about it. And I think that's something that we need to recognize more. So on behalf of all those people who have consumed your content, you'll never meet them, you'll never see them, and you help them in some way. On their behalf, thank you for what you've been doing. And thank you for what you
Thank you.
continue to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That means a lot.
Yeah, I think it's important. And it's important that you joined me on the show. Thanks, Kody. I mean, this has been fun. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. And really, genuinely, I've really enjoyed this too. I'd love to do this again sometime.
I'm going to keep you in mind. I've wanted to do a positive psychology summit or something like that, and I haven't done it. So I'm going to start collecting names. So your name is my first one on the list, and I'll add some more.
Excellent. Sounds great. I'd be so down. Awesome. So, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.